Hi, everyone. Thank you for being here on this very important day. I'm Susan Demas, the executive editor here at Lincoln Square. Before we begin, I just wanted to give you a heads up that what we're going to be discussing today may be triggering, so please take care. Today, we're coming to you live after the Epstein Survivors Conference with this unflinching special. Survivors, attorneys, and investigative experts will be on one stage telling the truth that the powerful try to bury. You'll hear new first-person accounts, legal updates on the Epstein files push, and the hard questions about Ghislaine Maxwell, her enablers, and the institutions that failed. We'll break down what's in the records, what's still sealed, and what justice must look like now. No spin, no euphemisms. If you're looking for answers, accountability, and action, this is the broadcast. Breaking the silence inside the Epstein files starts now. Survivors speak, lawyers respond, receipts reviewed. Stay with us, share the stream, and be part of the record.
That I am here is because it feels like the people who matter in this country finally care about what we have to say. As an immigrant from Brazil, I feel empowered knowing that the little girl struggling to get by at 14 and 15 years old finally has a voice. For the first time, I feel like I matter as an American. I was only 14 years old when I met Jeffrey. It was the summer of high school. I was working 3 jobs to try to support my mom and my sister when a friend of mine in the neighborhood told me that I could make $300 to give an older guy a massage. It went from a dream job to the worst nightmare. Jeffrey assistant Leslie Groff would call me and tell me that I needed to be at the house so often that I ended up dropping out of high school before 9th grade. And I never went back. From 14 to 17 years old, I went and worked for Jeffrey instead of receiving an education. Every day I hoped that he would offer me a real job as one of his assistants or something important. I would finally have made it big, as like we say, the American dream. That day never came. I had no way out. I was until he finally told me that I was too old. There are many pieces of my story that I can't remember, no matter how hard I try. The constant state of wonder causes me so much fear and so much confusion. My therapist says that my brain is just trying to protect itself, but it's so hard to begin to heal knowing that there are people out there who know more about my abuse than I do. The worst part is that the government is still in possession right now of the documents and information about that could help me remember and get over all of this maybe and help me heal. They have documents with my name on them that were confiscated from Jeffrey Epstein's house and could help me put the pieces of my own life back together. But I don't have any of it. And I know the same is true for many of these women. We are here to support this bill today, not only for transparency, but for the American people. But if the government is going to release these documents to the public, describing the crimes committed by Jeffrey Epstein and others, the least that they can do is give me my documents that they have about me. The other survivors deserve the same respect from our government. While identifying information must be redacted to the public, it is equally important to provide the victims themselves with unredacted information. I will never forget when the FBI agent showed up in my door in 2008. Jeffrey Epstein hired a lawyer to represent me, or more like to represent him, I'd like to say. I couldn't ask any questions, and I had no idea what was going on. I was terrified. Until today, I think most of us are still terrified. I thought somebody was going to kill me. I thought something was going to happen to my sister or my mother. it went further out to even maybe thinking something would happen in Brazil with my family. And then one day, the lawyer said that everything was just gonna go away. Like nothing happened. I didn't need to testify. When I asked him why, he gave no explanation. That was it. So why? Why was I never called to testify then? We could have saved so many women. We could have saved so many lives from being abused. Why did he get away with it in 2008? Why was he able to go on in the abuse with hundreds of girls after the Florida investigation? Why didn't they let me testify to help stop him? Our government could have saved so many women, but Jeffrey Epstein was too important and those women didn't matter. Why? Well, we matter now. We are here today and we are speaking and we are not going to stop speaking. Today, I stand here with the women who have really helped me to find the strength to come out and come forward to share my story for the very first time. Together, we are stronger than ever. While she may not be with us, Virginia Roberts, we will continue to use our voices to strengthen yours always. Thank you.
Our first guest today is Vicky Ward, an investigative journalist who first raised the alarm about Jeffrey Epstein in her 2003 Vanity Fair profile, although key survivor testimony was later removed under pressure from both Epstein and the magazine's editor. In recent years, she has investigated Epstein's network and abuses through her podcast and docuseries, Chasing Ghislaine, focusing on his associate Ghislaine Maxwell. Vicky has also spoken publicly about her decades-long investigation, highlighting the importance of survivors like Virginia Roberts Giuffre in uncovering the case's deeper truths. Vicky, thank you so much for joining us today on this very important day.
Thank you so much for having me, Susan.
Well, back when you first investigated Epstein, what red flags did you see that your editors ignored? And how did Epstein and Ghislaine Maxwell's social standing shield them compared to what we know in 2025 with the Epstein files finally emerging?
Yeah. Well, there were many, many red flags back in the fall of 2002 when I was tasked with writing about Jeffrey Epstein. And you have to remember, Susan, back then, he was not the household name he is today. Nobody knew who this guy was, where his money had come from. He was, he had sort of come from nowhere. And he was not a guy who was out publicly in New York. But his name did appear in the gossip page of the New York Post, which mentioned that he had flown Bill Clinton on his plane on a charity trip to Africa. And that was really the hook that persuaded Graydon Carter, then the editor of Vanity Fair, that, you know, I should go digging. And I was meant to be digging into this guy's money right from the beginning. It was clear that something very odd was afoot. First of all, I had not even begun to make phone calls. I was sitting at home, reading myself in my landline. It was the era of landlines and this voice on the end of the phone said, "You're Vicky Ward?" I said, "Yes, this is James Kane." Jimmy Kane was the CEO of a major investment bank, Bear Stearns, where Jeffrey Epstein had once worked. It's not normal for someone like that to phone a reporter unsolicited. And he said, "Can you come over this afternoon to meet with me?" And I remember vividly sitting there for hours. I was pregnant with my twin sons at the time, so it was actually very uncomfortable to sit for so long. And this guy went on and on and on, obviously on a clear charm offensive, trying to tell me how great Jeffrey Epstein was, what an important client he was to the bank, and how he had been a tremendous asset to the firm when he had worked there. Well, all of that I would later discover was not true. I mean, Jeffrey Epstein, I discovered in the archives of a law house in Philadelphia, had left Bear Stearns in the middle of an SEC investigation for insider trading in very strange circumstances, which raised questions as to what exactly his leverage over Bear Stearns actually really was. And that was only the beginning. Jeffrey Epstein himself started to phone me every day asking me what I had. And Ghislaine Maxwell, who I knew socially not well at the time, when she ran into me, started to cry, which again, I thought, you know what, this is very odd. I'm doing a piece about this man's business affairs. Why is Ghislaine Maxwell crying? Anyway, as the weeks rolled by, I encountered these two sisters, Annie and Maria Farmer, who told me of their horrendous experiences with both Jeffrey Epstein and Ghislaine Maxwell. Maria Farmer, the older sister, was an artist who'd gone to actually work for Jeffrey Epstein. Supposedly, she was there to help advise him on what young artists whose work he should buy. And whilst working for him, she had introduced Annie Farmer, who was then only 16 years old, in high school, wanted to go to an Ivy League university. And Jeffrey and Ghislaine had promised Annie that they would help her, that he would finance a trip abroad, which she needed to beef up her resume. But they said on the condition that they got to know her better. And they invited this young teenager, then in high school, for a weekend at Jeffrey Epstein's ranch in New Mexico. Annie Farmer's mother agreed to let her go because there was Ghislaine Maxwell, the sophisticated, Oxford-educated, worldly, upper-class British woman who's so well connected. What could go wrong? Well, a lot of things went wrong, beginning with the fact that poor Annie Farmer was given a topless massage by Ghislaine Maxwell, and Jeffrey Epstein one morning climbed in his pajamas into bed with her and pressed himself against her. Annie Farmer, not wanting to jeopardize her older sister's job with Jeffrey Epstein, didn't really know what to do or say about this. Imagine how difficult a position she was in. And then, but that same year, Maria Farmer, who had gone up to spend time in a house in Ohio on the estate of Leslie Wexner, hugely rich billionaire, Jeffrey Epstein's biggest benefactor. We still don't know exactly why Leslie Wexner entrusted his wealth, the management of it, to Jeffrey Epstein, a guy who had no formal college education. But they had this very, very tight relationship. Jeffrey Epstein had power of attorney over Wexner and Wexner's money. Up in that house, Maria Farmer was paid a visit by Jeffrey Epstein and Ghislaine Maxwell. And she told me about this hideous night where both of them abused her. And she had to call her father to come and pick her up, walk a very long way down a driveway, was absolutely terrified. And how she said she had gone to the FBI and she had gone to the police and nothing was done. Jeffrey Epstein, when I got to the point of where I got all the facts together for my piece, and so I got the Farmer's stories. I'd also got stories of partnerships with a criminal, a guy called Stephen Hoffenberg, who Jeffrey Epstein had definitely not wanted people to know he'd been associated with. But Stephen Hoffenberg and Epstein had been business partners, and Hoffenberg had gone to jail for 20 years, convicted of committing the biggest Ponzi scheme in American history prior to Bernie Madoff, and told me that really Jeffrey Epstein had been the entire brains behind all of that, and yet he'd escaped he'd escaped scot-free while Hoffenberg went to jail. When I put all these questions to Epstein, he didn't like the business stuff, but what really clearly enraged him was the stuff about the Farmer sisters.
And that was removed from your piece.
Well, ultimately, and I should add, as this all ticked on, he was threatening me. He was threatening, told me that he would have a witch doctor place a curse on my unborn children. He told me that he knew all the doctors in the New York City where I'd be giving birth. He told me he was going to get my husband fired from his job. And he would deliver these threats, and then he would say, and by the way, that's off the record. And so it was pretty intimidating because we didn't know anything about this guy. We knew he was incredibly well connected. But, I'd never dealt with anything like this before, and nor had the magazine. And, what ended up happening was very surreal, which was we fact-checked the piece. The Farmer sisters had 3 people who corroborated their stories, they had told the stories of their abuse to contemporaneously. I was put on bed rest because, one of my babies had stopped growing. And then I got an extraordinary email from a fact checker saying that Jeffrey Epstein was actually in the editor's office at Vanity Fair, which is unheard of.
Right.
And following that meeting, I was told in January that the Farmer sisters, the 2 sisters, their allegations had been removed from the story. And obviously, if you're me, you have to, it makes no sense, right? This man is suddenly in the editor's office, and then the allegations of the sisters have been removed from the piece. And that was an extremely distressing situation.
Right.
For me as a journalist, because the sisters were now exposed, because we'd put their allegations to Jeffrey Epstein and to Ghislaine Maxwell. And now the farmers were no longer protected by, when you put on the record allegations into print, that in a way is a shield. They're out there. Now we'd exposed them to the people they were accusing, and they'd got no protection. It was the absolute worst possible scenario.
And so now you have new survivors who are coming forward at today's event. And now the Epstein files are finally being forced into daylight to some degree. So what are the most urgent unanswered questions about their network and their enablers that journalists must start digging into now?
Well, I think we heard very clearly the 2008 plea deal. That was something that many of the survivors talked about this morning. What on earth happened to rob them of justice?
Right.
How on earth did the FBI investigation get quashed, and he got away with this ridiculous sweetheart deal with the state, in which he was allowed, yes, sort of be in jail and sort of not, and go to work, and then he comes out after that and carries on with impunity. So, number one, people want to know what happened there. I think they also want to know questions about the manner of his death. Right. And I think, what I've been banging the drum on is the system of power. We want to know why all these rich and famous men, not just in this country, but around the world, was so financially supportive or beholden to Jeffrey Epstein, because without the money, he wouldn't have been able to perpetrate these sex crimes against children. And I think that, you know, you saw the survivors say that if Congress fails them this time, they're going to try and take matters into their own hands, because between them, they have enough information that isn't in the public domain to put together a list of names of men they personally know were involved with Jeffrey Epstein. So I think, you know, we want to understand what was Jeffrey Epstein's leverage and over whom and why. Because only then when we have the answers to that can we begin to understand how this really corrupt system of power was enforced, and how we can make sure it never comes to pass again.
And from your interviews, how deeply was Maxwell entwined in Epstein's abuse? I know that you knew her somewhat socially, and now, of course, she's back in the headlines because she has been moved to a minimum security prison. Where are we at today in terms of understanding her role and getting justice for what she has been involved in and what she has put survivors through?
Well, until about a month ago, we were in a good place, right? Ghislaine Maxwell had been convicted for her critical role in the sex trafficking and the sex crimes. You know, without Ghislaine Maxwell, Jeffrey Epstein couldn't have committed them. It was precisely because these young girls trusted this sophisticated, well brought up, worldly woman that they got anywhere close to Jeffrey Epstein. So she was absolutely critical in the abuse. She was also critical in his building his powerful and financial network. It was her Rolodex through her father, Robert Maxwell, a world famous plutocrat who owned newspapers in this country and in Britain and around the world, who had connections to Israel, to Russia, to Bulgaria, who had been an essential financial conduit in Iran-Contra, in the Iran-Iraq war. Her father, who died himself in strange circumstances, and who was a crook, who stole $1 billion, that would be the equivalent today, from his own employees. But his network was also his daughter's network, and this was the network she gave to Jeffrey Epstein. Now, when I sat through every day of Ghislaine Maxwell's criminal trial, and what was a little bit frustrating about it was that we, although the sex crimes were laid out very clearly and powerfully by the 4 victims who testified in that trial, it was frustrating if you were trying to piece together the power and the money, because flight manifests would pop up on the screen, bank accounts would pop up on the screen, and bold-faced names like Trump, like Clinton, like all sorts of people would pop up, but you weren't able to piece all parts of that jigsaw puzzle together. She undoubtedly has answers that could be valuable. But as we saw what happened recently when Todd Blanche, the Deputy Attorney General, who, let's not forget, was Trump's personal lawyer and who had no direct experience with her discovery or with her criminal trial, went to quote unquote question her. It was absurd, because this is a woman who's appealing her conviction.
Right.
and who has nothing to lose and
Has
everything.
been found to have committed perjury.
100% has everything to gain, and he did not push back when she gave him basically a fairy tale version of her narrative, this sort of woe is me story of an upper class woman who had lost all her money and was vulnerable to Jeffrey Epstein, but really didn't see anything terrible go on. She didn't see any of the victims crying when they left the massage room. I mean, and Todd Blanche just let her talk without really pushing back. And she didn't give any sensible explanations about the money or possible ties to intelligence or the power. She had nothing of value to say. And at the end of it, she was suddenly moved from a high security prison to what we call a club fed. So you can imagine how the survivors who spoke today feel about that. And I must say, I was I thought it was very interesting that Anushka DeGiorgio, who had testified in Ghislaine Maxwell's trial under a pseudonym, Kate, Anushka came out today, I think for the first time, and said, wait a minute, I testified. And if she is pardoned, that makes a mockery of what I went through. I thought that was really powerful, actually.
And of course, survivors were not consulted before Ghislaine Maxwell was moved into that club-fed prison. And survivor stories have not been at the heart of what the Trump administration has been doing on this front. And so I think now would be a good time for us to bring in Jess Michaels, who is an incredibly brave survivor of Jeffrey Epstein back in 1991. Jess is a prominent voice who has been calling for the release of the federal Epstein files, and she's criticized political efforts to sideline survivors. She's also the founder of 3 Joannes, which is a trauma-informed initiative that's currently launching an app to help support survivors after their assault. Her work is dedicated to minimizing the long-term effects of violence, ensuring that survivors are seen, heard, and supported from the moment that they speak out. And I'm so glad to have you with us again, Jess.
And thank you for having me, Susan. Hi, Vicky.
Hi, Jess.
Jeff, I was wondering if you could tell us what inspired you to speak out as a survivor of Jeffrey Epstein.
Yes, well, my story is a long one. I'm actually a 1991 Jeffrey Epstein survivor, and I did not face any of the trauma of being sexually assaulted by him back then until I saw his face on Julie K. Brown's article, Perversion of Justice. And what was so profound about that moment was I saw his face. I didn't remember his name, but my whole body just started to shake. I started to sweat. I had a hard time breathing. And I knew that I had kept a journal, like I had my day planners from the 90s and all of my appointments, and I was a professional dancer, so I had been keeping track of my auditions, all that. So I went back and I looked, and I had his name, his Madison Avenue address, the phone number, his assistant's name, all in that journal. And just validating that this was the man that had in fact raped me in 1991. And it was Julie K. Brown writing that article. It was those first 4 women that came forward. But then it was really Virginia who, speaking out repeatedly over and over again, like just speaking truth to power, where I remember saying to myself, wow, she's amazing. I could never do that. Never could do that. And then here we are today at a rally and press conference.
Now, do you and Vicky know each other?
No.
Okay.
I think we've connected on Instagram, Vicky, way back during the Ghislaine Maxwell trial. I think I reached out.
It's very nice to meet you now, Jess. Nice. And obviously I did know Virginia.
Yeah. It was heart-wrenching to be there without her, not because I ever got to meet her, but to just watch and hear all the survivors, how sad it was for them to be there and to be uniting this way without her. Yeah, it was a really impactful day.
Yeah.
But it felt, when just watching it from, on TV, it felt like she, I mean, a lot of you talked about her, right?
Yeah.
I mean, I thought that was very powerful.
There was a level of bravery in her that just calls you.
Yeah.
And I don't think we could not speak. It would actually feel far more egregious to not speak and be there and do this. So there was a level of empowerment, and I have to tell you, a level of healing that I wasn't expecting.
I can just imagine the painfulness of watching your story literally being erased. And this is the experience of so many survivors out there. But then you have a moment like today where you have a united front and you're meeting people that you've never known for the first time. Can you tell us a little bit about how that felt? Because we only know, we've only experienced it from the outside, but you were there.
Well, yes, because you're connecting with people that have this shared trauma, right? And there's really no one else that understands, because it's not just a shared trauma. Let me even correct what I'm saying. It's not just a shared trauma. It's a global trauma happening that we all have a very personal connection to. And there's very few other people that really understand that every time we see his face or his name, that it affects me personally. I just have very physical responses to the trauma. My stomach is upset. My whole body starts shaking. I have insomnia, anxiety. So it was such a beautiful thing to be able to connect with other people that understood that, and with women that I have looked up to for the last, several years, since I first learned all the names of these young women, and I'm just so inspired by them.
With this new event and having some bipartisan support on full display, what message do you want people, when the world is watching, to take away from this fight for justice?
What I have learned over the last 4 weeks, just from my own interactions with the public and then meeting the other survivors and everything we're hearing from outside our survivors sister group, is that all of America cares about this. It is not a partisan issue. We know that we're not only speaking up for ourselves as Epstein, Maxwell survivors, but where people are relating is they are survivors that were never heard either. And they are done, and they are tired of seeing this particular issue brushed under the rug, and to see powerful men constantly get away with crimes. And we know that we're not standing alone, and we know when we speak, we're not just speaking for ourselves.
Vicky, what are some of the next stories that you are looking to tell now that there are new survivors who are speaking out? There's been a renewed push to try and connect the dots for Epstein's business associates.
Yeah.
What are you working on now?
Well, I think, I'm a bit scattered. I've got a book that's been announced that with James Patterson, we're doing the murder of the United Healthcare CEO. But I'm trying to do this at the same time. I do think that Senator Ron Wyden, Susan, has put in a great deal of work with his staff, and he has presented the Justice Department with a roadmap of where to go, to call in the bankers who banked with Jeffrey Epstein, to follow the wire transfers There were thousands of them with Russia to look at, get inside the settlement deal that was done with Leon Black, who paid Jeffrey Epstein $170 million for quote unquote for tax advice. I think, Les Wexner is still alive. He waited till Jeffrey Epstein died to say publicly that Jeffrey Epstein had stolen $60 million from him. Time for Leslie Wexner to explain what the nature of that relationship was really all about and why. We are going to hear Alex Acosta. I think we really, really need to get a detailed breakdown from him about what the heck happened in 2008. We also really need to hear from the surviving members of what Jeffrey Epstein called his dream team of lawyers. There were 9 of them, all of them very well connected in their different ways, who talked with Acosta and were part of those negotiations. So, I think, Susan, it boils down to 3 words: follow the money. And that's really where we need to go next to understand this global network of power.
And Jess, you've been so poignant in your criticism about the discussion over the Epstein files and how survivors' stories and their perspectives have not been centered with most of it. Do you feel like today might be a turning point where this dominated the news in Washington, D.C.? There were people on both sides of the aisle standing up to support. Do you think that you might finally reach that justice that you and survivors have been looking for so long?
Yes, it really felt so empowered and empowering. We had so much support, like you said, from both sides of the aisle. And I think this is just the beginning. I also want to put, justice for what has happened is really important. What I'm also seeing is, if we don't discover what failures, what incompetencies, what negligence happened, we can't change the future. And then this can just either keep happening, as it likely is now, or it can happen again easily. So there's a lot of work to do, but I think this was a solid beginning.
And Jess, could you just tell us a little bit more about your work in helping survivors, because it's just so inspiring?
Thank you. My advocacy centers around the fact that I lived with post-traumatic stress disorder for the last 30 years after being raped by Jeffrey Epstein. And for me, and in my learning of the neurobiology of trauma, I recognize that sexual assault is an injury. It's an injury that's invisible because it's happening in your nervous system, it's happening in your brain, and no one treats it like an injury. They treat it like a crime first. And the problem with that is that what is then happening physically and physiologically in the body is being completely ignored. And the steps that it takes to pursue a crime, which are having an invasive forensic rape kit done, going to police officers that don't always believe you, having friends and family just interrogate you because they are only thinking about justice and criminal activity and how to solve that. So my advocacy and the app that I'm building is around, let's treat sexual assault as if it's an injury first, and then a crime. Let's help someone get to safety first by how we treat them, how we take care of them, how we respond to them. And then let's hold their hand while they go through getting the justice that they deserve. But too often, survivors are left all alone while they're traumatized, having to navigate systems that they know nothing about, what their rights are, what their options are. And that's what I want to change. So the app that I'm building is called With You Too, and it is a social safety app to guide users to know what to do when someone that you love tells you me too.
Vicky and Jess, thank you so much for being with us, sharing your stories. We've so appreciated it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And right after the survivors press conference, I had the chance to speak with Gloria Allred, and she is an attorney who represents many of the Epstein survivors. I'm honored today to talk with Gloria Allred. She is one of the leading women's rights attorneys in the nation who has represented numerous survivors of Jeffrey Epstein and has been a relentless advocate for them. She's held high-profile press conferences, demanded the release of the Epstein files, and challenged institutions and individuals who enabled his abuse, while keeping media pressure on the Department of Justice and the Trump administration for failing to hold his associates accountable. Gloria, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you very much for inviting me, Susan.
Well, I know that you just came back from a rally with survivors. Can you tell us what today has been like to be a part of?
Yes, I had an opportunity to meet the family members of Virginia Giuffre, who were here, so that she could be honored by their having a voice for her, and also many other survivors of Jeffrey Epstein. I represent, or have represented, 27 victims of Jeffrey Epstein, some of Ms. Maxwell as well. You know, there were a lot of people there supporting the victims. And as I shared with them when I spoke, you know, I see there are three levels. The first is when someone becomes a victim, and then the next level is when they become a survivor. And the final level, which we need to talk about, is when they become fighters for change. And so that's what I encouraged everyone who attended to become, because there were many, many, you know, stories of what happened to them, how they became victimized, either adult victims of child sexual abuse by Epstein and Maxwell, or adult victims of adult sexual abuse, and some of sex abuse trafficking. I pointed out to them, I don't like it when people call those who harm children and women pedophiles. A pedophile is a man who is attracted to children. That's not a crime. Crime is sexual abuse of children or sexual abuse of adults. So I think we should call them what they are, predators or child molesters, whatever is appropriate, because that emphasizes the harm to the child, not just, you know, going around in circles thinking about the psychology of the predator who does it. In any event, also, I talked about how women and children were disappointed in the justice system, that it started with my client, Alicia Arden, who in 1997 was the victim of sexually inappropriate conduct by Jeffrey Epstein, when he contacted her through his secretary to come in for an interview because he was looking for models for the Victoria's Secret catalog. My client was a model and an actress, and she sent her photos in. And so then she met him at the Charters Hotel in Santa Monica. But she became a victim of his. She went to the police afterwards, reported it, and they said, well, think about whether you want to file a police report. And she went back to work. She thought about it for a week and came back and said, yes, I do want to file a police report. Well, no prosecution ever took place. So maybe if it had, attention might have then focused on Epstein and what he was doing even at that time that was sexually inappropriate. And then fast forward to Florida, where many victims were disappointed with the deal that U.S. Attorney from Florida, Mr. Acosta, made to, instead of filing numerous federal felony charges, the deal was made so that Epstein only faced 2 state charges, 13 months, register as a sexual predator, solicitation of a minor for the purpose of prostitution and trafficking. He was able to go to his office every day, Susan,
Right,
and work from his office and then just sleep in the jail at night. And so then fast forward to New York, where I saw him at the last hearing before he died or was murdered, depending on your point of view. And, you know, a lot of victims were looking forward to confronting him at a court of law, and they were denied that because, you know, of what happened to him at Metropolitan Correctional Center. So the point is, coming forward to today, what can we do? We need truth. We need transparency. We need justice. That's what we need.
I know you called that 2008 non-prosecution agreement a betrayal. So what lessons should the Department of Justice and prosecutors in 2025 take from that failure as the Epstein files are being unsealed?
Well, one of the failures, Susan, was the fact that they didn't even notify the victims. This was done behind their backs without consultation to them. Of course, victims need to be consulted, and it's their right to be consulted, under the Crime Victims' Rights Act. They maybe they could do it anyway, even if the victims didn't want to accept a plea. Then the U.S. attorney could go ahead anyway and accept a plea. But they need to be consulted. They weren't. So, it's kind of like something smells rotten in Denmark type of thing. Like why did they feel they need to hide it from the victims? Is it because they knew that the victims wouldn't like it? So yes, they were denied justice then. That's obvious. And still today, they want the truth. They know what happened to themselves, but what happened to others? Who else was involved? Were the third parties who should be held accountable? Were they involved in a conspiracy at these third parties, rich, powerful men, and or not? We don't know the truth, and we won't unless we have all the files. And if somebody has to go through them, there's somebody being the press, probably, the thousands of pages, maybe hundreds of thousands, to find out, to try to get to the bottom of it.
And with Ghislaine Maxwell being transferred to a minimum security prison at Fort Bryant, survivors were not consulted on that front either, correct?
Exactly right. And that you're making all the key points, Susan, because no, they weren't. And the fact that it came after that interview with the Deputy Attorney General, Todd Blanche, and like, what was this, some kind of reward for speaking to him? It doesn't, it's upsetting. She is a sexual predator. A jury found that she was a sexual predator. 4 victims testified very bravely. And now, why is she being rewarded with this kind of, they call it a camp instead of a prison, where she's been a minimum security situation she's in instead of where she was? There's nothing, you don't have to be a lawyer to be suspicious. There's a lot of suspicious things going on around. And the public, both Republicans and Democrats and independents in every poll, show they want transparency on the Epstein files. So, a lot of the files that have just recently been released were public in the first place. There's nothing new here. There's no there. So somebody's going to, or a number of somebody's have to go through it and tell us what is it in there that we didn't know before, so that we can then take the next step to accountability, if it's possible, if there's enough proof beyond a reasonable doubt, to prosecute anyone else.
It seems to me like the Epstein scandal really relies on how deeply people in power and who had privilege were protected all along the way. And that meant that there was no justice for your clients, for other survivors. How do we right this wrong today?
And that's what we need to do, is right this wrong. We want to know who else enabled, assisted, or conspired with. And I think what we need to do, Susan, is we have to follow the money, and we have to follow who was a close associate. And, I don't know if people were being blackmailed or not. I don't know. But we have to get to the bottom. Nature abhors a vacuum, and conspiracy theories come about when there are not facts. So we need to get to the facts, replace the conspiracy theories with the truth. That's what we need. Will we ever see the end of this? A lot of people would like it to see the end of it. A lot of people have been sexually abused as children, by the way. Maybe not by Epstein, not by Ms. Maxwell, but they feel they haven't had justice in their lives, and they would like to see the victims of Epstein and Maxwell get justice.
I'm wondering what kind of message you feel that this case has been sending to the thousands of victims of sexual abuse, when one of the most high profile cases has resulted in so little justice for survivors, even though, this has been in the public eye for some 20 years.
Well, I think the public is feeling that at least more victims are speaking out now. Maybe they felt shamed and blamed before, and now they're feeling permission to speak out. Now they have a cause they can speak out, maybe to help others not be victimized if they can. And they want women to be believed. They want children to be believed. So this is a fight for children and justice for them. And in a way, people are saying, well, maybe I didn't get justice for myself, but maybe I can help these victims win justice.
And Gloria, I know that you have represented so many clients over the years, especially women who have faced systemic discrimination and abuse.
We are the leading women's rights law firm in the country. And in January, it'll be 50 years that we've been practicing law as a law firm. So, and by the way, just a few weeks ago, we won a $4 million verdict in a court of law for a man who was discriminated against by a big corporation, Chevron.
But when you started this firm 50 years ago, did you think that this would still be the fights that you would have to battle right now in the year 2025?
Well, yes and no. But I do know this. Men have never been given their rights. Even today, women are never given their rights. We always have to fight to win them, and we always have to fight to keep them. And we also have to fight to enforce our rights. And that's the way it works. Power only understands power. So, a lot of men, they kind of afraid of me, and that's a good thing for my clients because that helps to get them the justice they deserve. We do a lot of confidential settlements without a lawsuit, which many of our clients would like, because many of them do want their privacy and they don't want to be on the internet as someone who was raped or sexually abused or sexually harassed. So we get them settlements without a public lawsuit. And then, the rich and powerful found out that if there's not going to be justice through a confidential settlement or and they can still go to the police with a confidential settlement, by the way. But if there's not going to be justice that way, we're not afraid to file lawsuits. And we have filed them, and we've gone all the way to the Supreme Court of California, United States Court of Appeals, and we've won cases. So all we want is justice, and then we'll go to another case. But if there's no justice, I'm a very persistent person, and I will just stay in it until we win it.
Gloria, thank you so much for taking the time to be with us on such a busy day. We so appreciate it.
Well, thank you for inviting me. I'd be happy to do it again sometime. Keep up the fight. And as I said at the end of my speech today, as someone once said, pray for the dead, fight like hell for the living. Thank you.
And thank you so much for joining us today. I want to thank our guests, Vicky Ward, Jess Michaels, and Gloria Allred, for taking the time to share their insights with us. We'd also like to thank Epstein survivors attorney Spencer Kuven for his help. And right now, we'll leave you with this moment from today's press conference from Epstein survivor Anushka DeGiorgio. And her words, I think, will stay with you.
Accountability is what makes a society well. I want to thank Congressman Massey and Kana for their role in putting together this very, very important bill. Every day of this journey toward healing has come at a profound cost to my mental health. But I am here. I chose to come because this bill really matters. I speak today not only in service of my own recovery from trauma inflicted by Maxwell and Epstein, but to honor the lives, the courage and sacrifices of Virginia Giuffre, Caroline Andriano, and others who could not continue. Their voices mattered. Their stories must not be forgotten. Accountability is what makes a society civilized. Equal opportunity and equal consequence for all. Consequences are not about punishment alone. They exist to deter future harm, to protect vulnerable, and to set a standard of justice. If Ghislaine Maxwell were pardoned, It would undermine all the sacrifices I made to testify and make mockery of mine and all survivors' suffering. That is why the Epstein Files Transparency Act is so essential. It requires the Department of Justice release all the records related to Epstein and Maxwell investigations, flight logs, immunity deals, internal communications, and even the records surrounding Epstein's detention and death. And crucially, it forbids withholding documents simply because of embarrassment, reputational harm, or political sensitivity. This is about ending secrecy wherever abuse of power takes root. But transparency alone is not enough. Survivors need protection, resources, and legal support. If this Congress is serious about justice, then let this moment also affirm your commitment to provide victims with the legal aid they need to confront abusers, to navigate complex systems, and to reclaim their power. Transparency must be matched by support, or else too many victims will remain silent out of fear and lack of access. The statistics demand action. Nearly 1 in 5 women in America will experience rape or attempted rape in her lifetime. Every 74 seconds, someone is sexually assaulted. Every 9 minutes, that person is a child. These are not numbers, they are people. They are your daughters, your sons, your constituents, your friends. Statistically, 1 in 5 of your families will face this nightmare. The days of sweeping this under the rug are over. We, the survivors, say no more. I want to help create a world where survivors of sexual abuse and abuse of power can come forward safely. And I ask Congress to join me in that effort, not only by passing this bill, but by ensuring that those who step forward have legal support to face their abusers and see justice done. When Judge Berman gave Epstein survivors the chance to finally speak, the world listened. After so many years, survivors were heard. That moment was historic, and so is this moment. For me, the turning point was when I had my daughter, and on the day she was born, I knew I had a responsibility to protect her and to protect all children. I have to use my voice, the voice that had been silenced by fear and shame for so many years. Make no mistake, my polished exterior is a shield hiding a wound that still bleeds. But through this wound, I have found purpose. To be part of lasting change in how we confront exploitation and abuse. And to be clear, the only motive for opposing this bill would be to conceal wrongdoing. You have a choice. Stand with the truth, or with the lies that have protected predators for decades. I am no longer weak. I am no longer powerless. And I'm no longer alone. And with your vote, neither will the next generation be. President Trump, you have so much influence and power in this situation. Please use that influence and power to help us, because we need it now and this country needs it now. Thank you.